Today we're working on Conte Sérieux, the second song in the Solos for Young Violists book by Barbara Barber. Welcome back. Welcome to the studio. My name is Cassie and I'm a professional violist and teaching artist. Today we're working on Conte Sérieux. This is the second song in the Barbara Barber book, and we're going to go through a few things, technical things, before we do our slow playthrough and then our at-tempo playthrough. So first things first, this piece has a lot of double stops in it. Now if you're not comfortable with playing double stops, my advice would be to practice doing that before you get started. So we're used to having A string level, D string level, G and C string level elbow, bow elbow. So in other words, when my bow is on the A string, my elbow is quite low. As it goes to the C string, my elbow has to raise. So in addition to these four gears or settings that we have for our elbow, we also need an A and D string setting, a D and G string, and a G and C string. So let's just practice a couple A and D strings. So I'm going to find my A, then my D, and then make sure that my bow's balanced halfway in between. If you want to imagine that there's a third string that kind of runs in between the A and the D string, and then you need to be balanced on that, that might be helpful. But again, I can find A string level, D string level, and then somewhere halfway in between, I'm balanced on both. You definitely do not need more arm weight when it comes to playing double stops. You're using the same amount of arm weight, it's just distributed evenly over two strings. So don't feel like you have to press more. So let's set our bow on the A and D, and we're going to gently pull. You should hear two strings sounding. If you're used to tuning your strings in fifths, you're already an old pro at this and you can skip ahead. I'll put timestamps in the description below. So once you found the A and the D string level, we're going to do the same thing for D and G. I'm going to find D level, G level, and then balance somewhere in between. If you find that you're getting more or only D string, you might need to lift your elbow up a little bit. And conversely, if you find that you're only getting G string, you might need to lower your elbow a little bit. Same thing goes for G and C double stop. Make sure that you're balanced in between both of those so that your bow is equally balanced on both strings. And again, if you're getting more G or more C, you need to adjust the level of your elbow accordingly. So now that we've touched on double stops, this whole piece is rife with them. I'm going to take a look at my key signature. I have two flats. I've got a B flat and an E flat. So every single B and every single E in this piece are flat unless otherwise indicated. So in the very first measure, I know that I've got a low 1 on the A string. So I have to make sure that I'm on B flat, not B to start out. Now to play double stops, again, we're going to balance on both of those strings, so your elbow needs to be slightly higher than it would be for the A string level. And I want to make sure that I'm hearing both notes equally. If I'm getting more on the A string, and sometimes the D string doesn't quite sound, just lift that elbow up a little bit. Same thing happens if you're only getting open D, just drop your elbow down a little bit. So this piece is really great for working on intonation, and intonation is, am I playing the correct note or not? Now we have two ways really to check that. I can use my tuner, or I can use another open string and play against it. So the intervals that we're going to be most concerned with are fourths, fifths, and octaves. These are our perfect intervals. Now these, there's no wiggle room for those. The very first note that we have, the D to the B flat, that's a sixth, and I'm getting that because I'm counting between D to B flat, D, E, F, G, A, B. They're 6 notes apart. Now that interval is not perfect, so there's a little bit of wiggle room as in terms of is it in tune or not. So you're going to hear a little wiggle or a ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba beat pattern when that note is played and it's in tune. I'm going to make it slightly out of tune so you can hear what that sounds like. You can hear immediately if something just doesn't sound correct. So for any interval that is not a fourth, a fifth, or an octave, we do have a little bit of wiggle room as in terms of do we hear it in tune or not. So I'm going to play that B flat with my D, the very first notes that we have printed. And then I'm going to reach a little bit for that next note because that is an octave, that is a perfect interval. There's no wiggle room there. It's either in tune or it's not. Now I can tell if it's in tune or not if I can barely hear that top octave D, so I'm hearing more of the open D as opposed to that high D. Again, I'm going to make it out of tune so you can hear what I mean. you're going to hear kind of two notes clashing against each other, and then the beat or the vibrations are going to be ba 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 really, really fast. We'll hear that again. It almost sounds like a helicopter's flying right over your head. If you hear that, the notes are not in tune, so you need to readjust. So again, we're going to practice going between the very first set of double stops and reaching for that octave that we have between the Ds. The next interval we have is a seventh, so it's not a perfect interval. Back to a sixth. And we're going to assume that we've tuned our open strings, our A and D. We don't hear any wobble there. The next measure, we still have B flat. And we've got this perfect fifth to a perfect octave. Measure 9, we've got the same intervals. 6, octave, 7, 6, perfect fifth, perfect octave. Okay, up until now, we've only had to put fingers on the A string, and it's a little bit easier because usually if I'm on a lower string and I have fingers on it, I have to be on the fingertips, and if I'm not, I'm going to run into that upper string and make an unintended double stop. So in the very next measure, our fingers are on the D string. So that means I might have to swing my elbow underneath a little bit more so that my fingers are only on the D string. You want to be on the fingertips. This is incorrect. My finger is very flat. I don't know if you can see that. It's very flat. I want to swing it around so that it's on the tips. That's a third. The next interval we have is perfect, so no wobbles here. This is incorrect. And you hear a lot of wobbles or beat interference there. So you want to make sure that that perfect interval is super duper in tune. Now, we've talked about this before, but if your note is out of tune, I don't want you to go fishing for it. So in other words, if I'm trying to tune that perfect fourth and I notice that it's out of tune, I played this, and I can tell, I can hear all those beat interferences, I know it's out of tune, I don't want to hear this. That's fishing for the note. It's not going to teach your finger the correct place to go down. It's going to teach it, oh, it's kind of somewhere around here, but we don't want that. So I'm going to lift my finger off, think, okay, I think it was a little bit too low last time. I'm going to adjust it a little bit higher when I put it down this time. Okay, if I can hit that 3 times in a row, I'm pretty sure I know where that finger goes. Let me try that again. Lift it off and try it again. So in other words, when you're tuning for intonation or when you're practicing for intonation, just please don't go fishing for the note. Lift it off and reset it. Continuing on at rehearsal A, we've got similar stuff. We've got fingers on the lower string with an open string above. So make sure your elbow swung very far underneath. We've got a perfect fourth to start out with. So that one's got no wobbles. Open D with an accent, so a very heavy bow arm. And a lot of that repeats up until rehearsal B. When I get to rehearsal B, it's like the beginning. My fingers are only on the A string. We've already talked about that a little bit. Looking ahead, the measure before C, I've got a circle with a plus sign going through it. Now that's going to be important when we get to the end of the song and we have to repeat. But just for right now, know that that sends me to the coda, and we'll talk about that in a second. All right, we're moving on to rehearsal C. Here, I've got a bunch of notes on the D string with an open G drone. Not the drone like that flies around, right? It's a note that I just continually play. So we're gonna do this without the open G and see if we can get this really, really in tune without that, and then we'll add it back in. So let's start right at C, and the key has changed here too. There's no more flats, so watch out for that. Low 2. Let's try that now with open G. There's one perfect interval there, and that's my third finger G with my open G. So that's the one that we're aiming to have super duper crystal clear in tune. The other notes are the very first interval with open G and E is a sixth. Then we've got that perfect octave. Then I'm going to reach a little bit for that 4. This is a ninth. And it's going to sound a little bit clashy, and it should sound a little bit clashy. Then we're back to that octave. Now we've got a seventh. That's another clashy interval. We don't want it to be too clashy, because then it's a little bit out of tune. So it's that fine balance of just the right amount of clashy. And for that, I would recommend busting out your tuner and making sure that your 2 is tuner perfect, and then playing it with your open G. Next measure, we've got similar intervals, so I would do that without my open G first. Then we've got a D that's got a stem going up and a stem going down. What that indicates is a 4th finger on the G string D as well as my open D. So it's a double stop of Ds. Next one, we've got an 8th note, so I'm only going to play D with my very first note there, B, then let go of the D. The next 2 measures, 33 and 34, are kind of a repetition of what we did before, so we're going to skip ahead to 35, which is where we're playing with fingers on the C string. Perfect 4th. Then back to fingers on the G string. Fingers on the D string. Then a perfect octave. Written under that perfect octave, we have D, C, al, coda. That means in Italian, da, capo, or to the head or to the beginning, al, until the coda. So you're going to go back to the beginning, play from the beginning until you see that circle with the plus sign that we talked about before. And then we're going to jump down to the very last line, measure 37, at the coda. The coda is a lot of what we have seen before. I want to talk about the last 3 notes because here we have to put fingers on 2 strings. So the last 2 measures, I've got an open D and G, and then I've got to put my low 2, because we changed back to the key signature of the beginning, on the G string, and my 3 on the D string. And we've got to play those together. So my advice is after you play that open double stop to set your 3 and then reach backwards a little bit for that 2. I find it's easier to reach backwards when I've already got a finger set as opposed to reaching forwards when I have a finger already set. It may be different for you, so you may feel better setting your low 2 and then reaching up for your 3. Try both ways and see which one works out for you. Now we're ready for our playthrough. I'm just going to do an at-tempo playthrough because it's already kind of a slow piece. The dynamic marking is half note equals 46, but I just doubled that and I set it to quarter note equals 92. So I will count to 4 and we'll begin. Remember, we've got 2 flats at the beginning. 1, 2, 3, 4. video helpful. If there's anything that I missed or anything you still have questions about, please post that in the comments below. I really enjoy trying to help from afar. As always, thank you so much for joining me today, and happy practicing.